I want to welcome back to the program Andy Kroll, reporter covering voting elections democracy at ProPublica. He's written about Leonard Leo, the man behind the right Supreme Court supermajority, and more. Andy, welcome back to the program. I'm here with Emma Vigeland.
Great to be back. Thanks for having me, guys.
Leonard Leo, I didn't realize this, but the guy's basically like my age. And he is the founder of the Federalist Society. And I didn't realize, or one of the founders, right, of the Federalist Society. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, I mean, I like to say, but by the way, you definitely look younger than he does, Sam.
Thank you. That's what I was looking for, Andy. I appreciate that. I think he's a year older than me. He's a year older than me, but I remember all this. I mean,
your head of hair, the beard, just you've got to beat in that department. Trust me.
Well, thank you. That's what I.
All right, Andy, quit it.
I had to butter him up a little bit.
There you go.
So Leonard Leo, I mean, I've come to think of him as the most important person in American politics that almost everybody hasn't heard of. He came up through the Federalist Society. He wasn't a co-founder exactly, but he was one of the earliest employees. And he's the guy who saw the Federalist Society as more than just like a intellectual debating club for conservative law students who felt like they were, outcasts or besieged or whatever. He believed that the Federalist Society could be a political juggernaut. It could be the engine to churn out future Scalias, future Clarence Thomases, future judges, future attorneys general, not just of the U.S., but of every state in the nation. His imprint on certainly the American legal system, but I would say even bigger than that, American politics writ large, is it's hard to wrap your arms around. I mean, that's why this story we wrote is so dang long. And, we took 3 hours of podcasts as well to tell his story. I really think people need to know it. It's when you know about him and you see what he's done in the world, both in the federal level and the state level, a lot of things start to make sense that didn't make sense before you recognize him.
The thing that really strikes me about the Federalist Society is, and I think I've been having conversations about the Federalist Society for 20 years, really, on air regarding like what they have that the left doesn't have. And I've seen it grow. And for me, the fundamental story about specifically about the Federalist Society, it is like, it functions as sort of as a placement like service, and it becomes self-perpetuating, where there is nothing even remotely like this on the left. There has been attempts with the American Constitution Society, but that has really, I think, in many respects, failed in that regard. But explain this dynamic, and then we'll get into how it developed.
Yeah, it is exactly what you describe: a placement service, a talent pipeline, a training academy. I mean, you can use a baseball analogy if you want and think of it as a farm system where, if you get all the way to the top, you're the Supreme Court, but there are a lot of other great teams to play on below the Supreme Court in this tortured metaphor. But it's more than that too, though. I mean, the other really key insight we had is, in the 90s, the Leonard Leos of the world, the conservative legal activists, have this crisis moment where 3 Republican appointees on the Supreme Court write an opinion in a case called Casey versus Pennsylvania that essentially upholds Roe v. Wade. This is a case, again, that was written, the majority opinion was written by O'Connor, Souter, and Kennedy, all Republican appointees, all expected to be with the conservatives on this issue of reproductive rights, and they are not. And so what the Federalist Society also does is it is a sort of intellectual hothouse for these young law students and lawyers and judges. It is a place where they can, hang out, they go to their conferences, they do their networking, blah, blah, blah. But the ideology, the legal doctrine is, if it's not enforced, it's certainly a sort of bubble for them where you won't have that problem of a David Souter in the future going soft on you or drifting to the left. I mean, the rallying cry in this crowd was no more Souters. The Federalist Society was the place where these people would go to try to prevent against that intellectual legal drift. So it's not just putting them in the jobs, it's also making sure before they get the jobs, and then when they get those jobs, that they don't drift toward the center, toward the left like Souter did.
So it vets, but it also disciplines and keeps people within that now, so that it got to the critical mass where he could put people in jobs, and that would mean that's not just like judgeships in terms of it's state deputy solicitors. It is state deputy attorney generals all across the country. He got to the point where he could put people in jobs, and having the Federalist Society moniker imprimatur was a job benefit. Now it's basically a requirement.
Yeah.
But it also means that, to be in good standing in the Federalist Society, you need to prove that you're willing to make certain decisions at certain points and show within that organization. It's like there's a hazing almost. There's like, it's like we don't really have, it's a combination of a lot of different things that is really hard to point to a perfect analogy in our society, because we don't really have something like that.
It's hard to put your finger on it. I mean, ideological conformity is a part of it. Some of it is just like soothing these people, when they're judges and they feel like, the liberals are treating them in a bad way. They're mean to them when they go out for dinner or whatever. They can always retreat back to the Federalist Society chapters, the Federalist Society National Conference, which is like nerd prom for conservative lawyers, and feel safe. And that wasn't there before. I don't think the left took it seriously for a really long time. Didn't take it seriously until it was too late, thinking, oh, well, they have their dinners, they have these debates, so isn't that nice? But like, that doesn't affect us in any way. Why would we do that? Until all of a sudden it was, the Bush administration first, and then absolutely the Trump administration fully outsourced the judicial process to the Federalist Society. And then the liberals were like, oh, crap, that's what this was. And we don't have anything like this. And we're 20 years behind.
But it wasn't part of it too, though, it seems to me, is that to acknowledge that a society, a function like that can exist within the law, that judges are getting up there with a prescribed sort of like, a menu as to how they're going to rule on things. To me, it wasn't just that the political left didn't acknowledge it. It was that the legal institution, and I'm still not convinced that they fully accept this. I don't think they can, because it fundamentally undermines the sort of like fiction that much of the classical legal thought is obligated to buy into, which is judges just look at the facts and the law, and they're not politicians. It's not political. And in fact, it is. And all of the fact that Leo could have done this is indicative of that fact that nobody wanted to actually recognize and reconcile with.
We talked to Carolyn Fredrickson, who ran the American Constitution Society for a while. And in her own begrudging way, she was impressed with what Leo had built. And, she said, and we quote her in the story saying this, is, the right saw the courts as a political machine in a way that the left never did, or did far too late. Again, if it did at all. And there just isn't someone in the history books that we could find who had this insight in the way that Leo did, and also in the way that they use these ideas of originalism and textualism, sort of cloaked them in theory and history and scholarship and so on, when really they did also serve a very clear political purpose. They absolutely aligned with the political and policy priorities of the sort of libertarian corporate economic types, the Kochs, the Christian right, the Catholic right. I mean, this was very, very convenient for them that they could say, oh, it's all about the theory and the idea and the faithfulness of the Constitution, but also it accomplishes everything that we want to accomplish on a policy side, economics and otherwise. So, and again, the left just, I don't think, paid attention or really thought hard about all of these things until Donald Trump is saying, the Federalist Society is picking on my judges. Isn't that great? And it was basically like the good housekeeping stamp of approval for his presidential campaign back in 2016.
But I feel like when Feingold became the ACS president, there was an awareness, and there was an attempt, and maybe it was even during the Obama years, where there was an attempt to recreate this sort of same dynamic where the imprimatur of the ACS would help you get confirmation as a judge. And I think it was like Lou, I can't remember his first name, who was prevented from getting on the federal bench, or maybe it was and the ACS moniker actually became perceived, if not necessarily a benefit, but a liability. Like there is not the same network and frankly the same money that teams through this, because if you have that kind of money, you're going to want judges who are going to rule ultimately in your favor more often than not. And there's sort of like a conflict there, and it becomes the most naked, it seems to me, within the context of the judiciary. But people really should read this to understand that how that network worked. And like, it's so businessy and corporate. And it's, you could use the you could use, it seems to me like you could translate in this to like a small town where like somebody's going to be, I work for the United Way, or I'm sitting on this board and that board, and I'm creating these networks, and it's all networking essentially, but with one specific agenda in mind. But the other part that I found fascinating about your piece, and it touches on this in terms of the Supreme Court justices, is his job in keeping these Supreme Court justices happy. Because the way that we ultimately dealt with the court packing that didn't happen under FDR, my understanding was to increase, or maybe this happened prior, increase the pensions of judges to get them to retire, because they could retire and enjoy like a good pension. And now if you're a judge, you could leave and make a ton of cash. And you address that. Will you talk about that part of it? Because it starts to make sense why Leonard Leo is so deeply involved in making Ginny Thomas so incredibly wealthy and engaged in things. Why having, Harlan Crow come and pay for my mom's house and my kids' private school, why that is so important.
It was the big question hanging over all of the great Supreme Court corruption reporting we've been doing this year. We've got the receipts on the house. We've got the receipts on the yacht trips, the photos with Leo and Crow and Thomas and all of those folks in the Adirondacks. But the thing we couldn't put our finger on was why? Why are you doing this? Why are the justices, some of them, so brazen about this? And also just milking it in, just how many trips can they go on? How many perks can they accept? Gifts can they rake in? And, I was talking to, of all people, George Conway, the never Trump activist guy now, but someone who people forget until about 2015 was very much a card-carrying Federalist Society member, donor, advisor. I mean, this was his world until it wasn't. And what he told me and what other people subsequently told me was that these justices, Thomas, Alito, Scalia, RIP, they even though they have some of the most powerful jobs in the world, they still see themselves as victims, as targets, as unfairly maligned by the media and the mass culture, whatever, Washington. They also don't feel like they get paid enough. for those incredibly powerful jobs. So, there are a lot of feelings for these justices, apparently. And there was a real fear that a Scalia or a Thomas would say, you know what, I don't make enough money for how influential I am. All these people are mean to me when I go out to dinner with Ginny or whatever. Screw this. I'm out. I'm done with this job, even though the power that comes with it is so vast. I'm going to go work at some big law firm and make a ton of money, and I'll have my own house in the Adirondacks or the Indonesia or whatever. And so what Leo did was as Conway described him as a quote unquote den mother to these justices rather. He made sure that they felt loved and that they felt, doted upon by these wealthy individuals who, of course, they like these judges. They want to support them. They want them, to feel loved too. And so Leo played this connector kind of role, this consigliere type almost behind the scenes, where he would have these private dinners and the justices would be invited. And some wealthy donors would be invited. It's the same kinds of donors. And some Federalist Society people would be invited, including George Conway, who actually went to these dinners and saw how all this sausage got made. And that helped keep these justices happy. It helped them.
It's like they bring them there and it's like, hey, here are these billionaires across one side of the table. Here are these justices. Adopt a justice. Yeah. Essentially is what was going on.
Right. Come to Napa and do a Federalist Society talk, which already rough, but then, fly to Alaska afterward and go salmon fishing with, a major donor to Leonard Leo's enterprises. And, there's this sort of circle to this. There is I think synergy is what George Conway called it, but I will never use that word because I hate that word. But anyway, you get what I'm saying. And the key thing is
it serves everybody at this in the situation. Leonard Leo gets credit from both ends of that transaction. He gets it from the donor and he gets it from the justice. So his power increases. The justice, gets what they want in terms of like the trips and the house and the private school education and all this. And the donor has access to a judge. That's something that, his $billions turns out can buy, but it's, and also has an agenda at times that probably gets paid off, but you got a couple of $1 billion. At that point, it's just like, I pal around with a Supreme Court justice. It's so twisted and problematic.
Oh God. Yeah. On so many different levels. Even personally, if you told me a year ago that we would have a conversation about gross influence peddling at the Supreme Court and the influence being peddled is to the justices themselves, I think I, like a lot of people, still believe, no, the Supreme Court is above that. They are on their own little Mount Olympus, even though obviously we have Abe Fortas in the past, Stephen Douglas in the past. This isn't the first time this kind of thing has happened, but the degree to which it happens and has happened is just striking to me. And again, even all year as we did our stories about at ProPublica about Thomas and Harlan Crow and Alito and Paul Singer, all these lurid details, $1,000 bottles of wine, there was someone missing. We knew that there was a piece missing. It was like a portrait on the wall and one person's silhouette is sort of cut out. And we figured out that is Leonard Leo. And it just clicked into place for me, and I hope for people who read this or listen to the podcast, it clicks into place for them too.
All right, people should go and listen to the podcast and read the piece to get an understanding of this, because there's so much to be learned about it in terms of like this dynamic. But what it seems to me, the only thing that can be done, to the extent that anything can be done about this, is really the ethics reform that has been stalled, it seems, in the Senate because they put out that PR document yesterday that turned out to be really nothing more than a PR document. But I'm looking at like Cory Booker and I'm looking at Durbin and I'm looking at these guys and what they're saying now, like, we need to check this out. People need to push back on this and say, this document does nothing.
They absolutely need to push back. If you care about this issue at all, if you've followed it at all, you absolutely have to make your voice heard. And really, I think you got to put some heat on the Democrats here. I mean, I was on the Hill yesterday talking to all of these people that you just mentioned and more. Durbin, Cory Booker, Sheldon Whitehouse, who's obviously very vocal and very active on this. There are subpoenas still under consideration in the Senate Judicial Committee for Leonard Leo and for Harlan Crow. If those subpoenas were to actually go through and to be, actually authorized and out there, they would turn up a lot of information, a lot of things that we do not know, despite all that we have learned this year. But right now, it is unclear if the Democrats will go forward with it. They are getting cold feet. That is what I was told over and over on the Hill yesterday. Various senators, for various reasons, are starting to think, oh, well, the code looks good, and maybe we'll sort of, bring the Supreme Court ethics recusal transparency bill to the floor for a vote, and then we'll say we did our work here. But that can't be the end. That is not actual transparency and accountability. So people got to be loud. Just look up who the Democrats are in the Senate Judiciary Committee.
We're going to do that, and we're going to post their names on the podcast and YouTube description and their phone numbers, and people can very easily call.
Those are the people that the senator, that you need to contact for sure right now.
Andy Kroll, we'll put a link also to your piece and the podcast on Leonard Leo. Thanks so much for your time today. Really appreciate it.
Always a pleasure. Thanks for having me.